Hello, everyone. My name is Olivia. I'm 47 years old, and this is one of the most unbelievable stories I've ever experienced. Even now, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it, but I can't stop replaying the events in my mind.
Being late. Not a few minutes late, but arriving 30 minutes or more after the agreed time. Revealing that he's married, but still looking for something on the side. Going on and on about wanting a traditional family where the mom stays home and doesn't work. That's not my thing, so move along. Similarly, bringing up alpha male ideology. Just no. Constantly being glued to their phone. Showing up with 3 kids they neglected to mention beforehand. Once, a guy arrived at the wrong lunch spot and made me drive to meet him, even though I was working and he wasn't. Strike 1. When I got there, he stepped out of his car in sweatpants after making me wait over 2 hours for him to get ready. Strike 9. He was also 7 inches shorter than he claimed. Not an issue, but lying is. Strike 13. On top of all that, he was missing key teeth necessary for eating a burger, which I didn't even count as a strike. Then he launched into an extended, loud anti-government rant, only pausing when I noticed someone breaking into my car. I ran outside to confront the thief, expecting him to assist, but he stayed seated, letting me handle it alone. That earned him strikes 1,39276,651. Oh, and he cried twice. Watching him eat the burger wasn't nearly as amusing as I'd hoped. Being nice to you but rude to the waiter, because one day you'll likely be treated the same way. Turning the conversation into a one-sided affair where I ask all the questions and show interest in them, but they barely, if ever, reciprocate. Mocking my hobbies or interests. Spraying holy water on me because I've never been baptized. Being married, bringing a friend along due to nerves, or bragging excessively about a knife collection at home. Things I never expected to encounter on first dates. Yet, here we are. Lying about who they are. If someone turns out to be completely different from what they led me to believe beforehand, I lose interest immediately. I don't mind differences in weight, height, politics, or religion, but deception is an instant deal breaker. Before meeting my boyfriend, I once went on a Tinder date with a guy new to my area. When I casually mentioned certain places to avoid after dark due to frequent muggings, he condescendingly explained that walking there would be fine if you were confident. He bragged about being a seasoned traveler who'd never had an issue. I insisted the area wasn't safe, but he kept interrupting, acting as if it was a challenge to prove me wrong. His arrogance, especially in this instance, led me to make an excuse and leave early. If he thought he was so invincible, he was welcome to test his theory. Disliking animals. I've always had dogs, currently have 2, and I once ended a date early when the guy mentioned he hated animals. Yesterday, I went on a date with a Christian guy, I'm an atheist, but that wasn't an issue, who launched into an unsolicited speech about how homosexuality isn't in line with God's plan. Considering we were both men on a gay date, it was baffling, to say the least. Lacking a sense of humor or having one that doesn't align with mine. His living room only had a couple of lawn chairs for seating, which he explained was because he'd just moved in. Later, he admitted the real reason. He'd recently been released from the state pen. Before I decided to leave, he mentioned that he'd already talked to his mom about me and believed I was a special, understanding woman. Turns out I'm not that person. Expecting sex is a massive red flag. Here's a story. I went on the worst date of my life a while back. The guy seemed decent enough at first, but during the date it became clear he was both sleazy and possibly unhinged. Out of nowhere, he asked if I was on birth control. When I said yes, he responded, "Great, so I don't need to use a condom." I was stunned. Who says something like that? At that moment, I knew I'd never go near him. Still, I felt compelled to point out how absurd his statement was. I asked what he'd do if I got pregnant. He brushed it off with, "No big deal. You just get it taken care of." He didn't grasp that abortions are neither cheap, easy to access, nor enjoyable experiences. When I explained that, he rolled his eyes and complained that condoms were unfair to him and that using one was a deal breaker. I left the restaurant so quickly I probably gave him whiplash. He tried to backpedal, saying, "Maybe I can make an exception for you." I declined and made it clear I wasn't interested. 9 months later, he called, wanting to meet up, complaining that no girl in DC wants to go on a date. It's so frustrating. Gee, maybe because you're awful. Oh, and this guy was 30 years old. This kind of nonsense might be expected from a teenager, but not a grown man. From experience, casually claiming the Earth is only a few thousand years old and that rock stars gain fame by selling their souls to Satan. The worst part is realizing they weren't joking. I met up with a woman I'd been chatting with for weeks. We lived in different towns and agreed to meet at a pub in her city. I barely finished half a pint. All she did was rant about how men are useless, only care about one thing, and so on. She seemed genuinely shocked when I stood up, said goodbye, and left. Being openly racist or sexist without even realizing it, then subtly shaming me for who I am. I never called her back. Bragging about how wealthy your family is, or mentioning that your brother was gifted an Audi by your parents. Coming from a rich background isn't a problem, but bringing it up on a first date makes me assume you don't have much else to offer. I wore heels on a blind date, and the guy immediately looked me up and down and said, "It's rude to wear heels on a blind date, you know?" I responded, "I'm sorry I didn't account for the fragility of your ego." He tried to backtrack, pleading with me to stay for dinner. I had half a drink before leaving. If someone reveals their true nature early on, there's no point in wasting time. I once matched with someone on a dating app who used photos that were 20 years old and lied significantly about her age. She claimed to be 25, and I was 19. When she asked if I was okay with dating an older woman, I said I didn't mind. But when she showed up, my first thought was, wow, her photos are very flattering. Since I was already there, I decided to make the best of it. Later, I discovered she was actually 49 and had a son older than me. How did I find out? Her son worked at the bowling alley we went to. When we arrived, she seemed nervous, but I assumed it was first date jitters. Then, while I was getting food, her son pulled me aside to ask what I was doing with his mom. He told me she was 49, married, and, here's the kicker, 6 months older than me. When I was dating in my late teens and early 20s, I was both naive and insecure. I used to feel flattered when a guy told me I was far better than his ex, who he claimed was a BG. Now that I'm dating again in my 50s, with more confidence and life experience, my reaction to hearing about the Bosch ex is, what did you do to her? Poor hygiene. I once nicknamed a guy Halitosis Boy. He arrived at a date smelling like he hadn't bathed in months. The odor was so bad I had to lean back in my chair just to avoid it. Disgusting. He was the worst offender, but many men don't even bother dressing or grooming properly for a date. It always makes me think, if this is their best effort, that's a hard no. Being overly self-centered. I went on a 2-hour blind date, and by the end I knew every detail about her life. I even learned all of her cats' names and their favorite movies. She didn't ask me a single question and kept switching topics to talk about herself. When she asked to exchange numbers at the end, I couldn't resist asking, "What's my name?" She didn't know. I just paid for my meal and left. Racism. Supporting Trump. Honestly, it shows that their moral beliefs are the complete opposite of mine, leaving no chance of compatibility. Not understanding why meeting in a public place for a first date is important for women. Backhanded compliments that insult my gender. For instance, "Wow, you really know your stuff." I've never met a woman who knows this much about politics. Sorry, but plenty of women do. You just weren't paying attention. One time, a guy I met online invited me to a local sushi restaurant. We had been texting and chatting for about a week, and I finally felt comfortable meeting in person. He picked me up, and the car ride was great. We seemed to have a genuine connection. But once we got to the restaurant, he ordered $100 worth of sushi, while I ordered a roll and a couple of appetizers, totaling around $30. I tried to engage him in conversation, but he was glued to his phone. He ignored me, took pictures of his food, and posted about how amazing the restaurant was. He devoured everything in front of him. When the bill came, he was still on his phone, laughing at responses to his posts and ignoring the waiter. The server placed the bill on the table and left. I asked the waiter politely to split the check, which he did, and when the bills were brought back, my date looked up, shocked at the $100 charge. I paid for my portion along with a generous tip. My date then said, "Oh no, I forgot my wallet. Can you cover me?" I pretended to be busy on my phone, walked out, and left him there. I had already ordered an Uber since he had driven us to the restaurant. And yes, don't worry, the waiter received a tip equal to my entire bill. It wasn't his fault my date was terrible. The number of guys who think negging is an effective way to flirt is astounding. Despite what you might read on WikiHow, insulting a girl doesn't make her want to win your approval. It just shows her you're a jerk.